hot. Okay. Thanks everybody for joining us. This is the Navigating the Housing Maze session. So if you're here for a different session, you're in the wrong place. So time to move. Tremendous conversations today. I have to admit, I'm coming at this from a very different space than you all. I'm Ray Demers with Enterprise Community Partners. We are an affordable housing nonprofit, really trying to bring solutions to the spaces of affordable housing and link that up with access to opportunity, better schools, better health outcomes, those types of things. So I'm an outsider, but thanks for welcoming me. It's really great to be here. I'm moderating this panel, and I'm really thinking of myself as your conversational chaperone. I'm really here to lead us through a robust dialogue where we have four researchers and practitioners who are really creating some groundbreaking insights into the conditions of our city and our greater metropolitan region. We're going to start with Jessie Partridge Guerrero with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. She's going to be sharing some insights on this rental listings aggregator. After that, Lauti Cantar from the American Cities Coalition will be speaking on a new housing search tool for low-income voucher holders. After that, Elizabeth Kazakoff from the Department of Innovation and Technology with the City of Boston will be speaking on the impacts of Airbnb in our community and sort of what that means for the rental housing market. And then following that, Amar Mehta with the Boston Public Health Commission will be speaking about the linkages or lack of linkages between adult food insecurity and subsidized housing. So each of our presenters will go one in turn. If we have time after their presentation, we'll open it up for some clarifying questions. And then after all four go, we'll have a moment for question and answers. All right. So thanks. Thanks for that. If there are seats next to you, which I don't see very many, if somebody comes in the room, please, there's one there, so if somebody would like to take it, everybody else is out of luck. And I'll turn it over now.
Thank you. Hey everyone, good afternoon. Thanks for coming out to our session. My name is Jessie Partridge Guerrero. I'm the research manager at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. MAPC is the regional planning agency for the 101 cities and towns that make up Metro Boston. I work in the data services department where we provide research, analytical, and digital services to support informed decision making. I'm going to be talking about the work we've been doing over the last couple years to collect rental listings data from online sources. A lot of people have been involved in this work over the years that we've been doing it. Tim Reardon, our Director of Data Services, who you heard this morning, Alicia Ruau is our Digital Services Manager, and Eric Youngberg has been the lead developer on this project. A few other people, Matt Gardner was our web developer who really wrote the first script that we ever had to scrape pad mapper listings back in 2015. Paria Pomahamadi and Carlos Sandoval, who helped us last summer write some of our cleaning and geolocating scripts as well. So why do we need a rental listings database? The answer is probably obvious to most of you in the room. As we all know, Metro Boston is one of the most expensive places to rent a home in the US. 50% of renters in Metro Boston are housing cost burdened. And as researchers and planners, we really want to be able to investigate this issue from many angles, and we need data to do that. Our existing available data sources are really insufficient to meet those needs. The American Community Survey, a very reliable and consistent data source, doesn't give us a full picture of the kind of current rental listings market. It includes people who have moved into their home in the last year, but also people who have lived in their home for 20 years and might have a good deal on their rent. It also, to get to geographic specificity, aggregates to a 5-year period of time, so there's quite a bit of lag to the currency of the data. And then there are also private sources of rental listings data. There are some challenges with these as well. For one, they're pretty expensive, so they can be prohibitive in that way. They're often opaque about the methods they use for collecting the data and cleaning it. And there tends to be a bias in those sources They rely on kind of professional real estate companies for their listings rather than smaller individually owned landlords and owner-occupied units. So we've been collecting this data. I'm going to go a little bit quick because I don't have a lot of time, but we've been collecting the data from PadMapper and Craigslist since November of 2015. Over the last 2 years, the last year and a half, rather, we've been working with 4 municipal partners: Boston, Cambridge, Quincy, and Somerville. Some folks in the room have been our main partners on this project, to really dig into the more than 2 million records that we've now collected, to clean them, deduplicate them, and turn this into a really useful data product for municipalities and researchers and planners. So the first thing we did when we started this collaboration with our municipal partners was to ask, kind of get a sense for what were the really pressing research questions we wanted to be able to answer with this data. How many units are naturally affordable? Where are rents going up? What is the effect of amenities on rent, whether you're near a train station or a university, or specific characteristics of the unit itself? And how does development impact the rent of areas surrounding it? So I want to quickly go through some of our methods before I give some very preliminary findings. All of our processes in this system are automated. We use Python scripts to collect data from PadMapper and Craigslist, as I mentioned. PadMapper has an API, so we can connect to it directly and pull the rental listings from PadMapper that way. Craigslist does not have an API. We actually pull the data for Craigslist from the map view. So if you've ever looked for an apartment on Craigslist, you can look at the map. We pull it from there. It's kind of a quicker, more efficient way to pull all of that data. We then clean, deduplicate, and add some value to the data. We found in our deduplication method that up to 2/3 of the listings that we collect are actually duplicates. We also know that there are issues such as rooms for shared rooms, or one room roommate listings in a three bedroom unit, or short-term rentals. So we do some work to try and clean, filter those units out, and then we geolocate to the extent possible. We can't geolocate the Craigslist data because we don't have a good address to join it to, and it kind of depends where the person has put it on the map. I'm going to go quickly because I have only 5 minutes left. And then on a quarterly basis, we report aggregated summary data at the census tract level, neighborhood level, and municipal level to our partners. This is what it looks like Q4 of 2017. If I zoom in, this is where we are right now. Each blue dot represents a listing. The pink dots are those that have an address that we're able to match to the MassGIS address list and to a parcel. The green dots don't have an address that we can exactly match, and these are only, the ones that we're able to geolocate are only PadMapper listings, but the green ones we join to a parcel using a spatial buffer of 20 meters. The dark blue dots remaining are either Craigslist listings, where we can't certainly say that it's in the right location, or PadMapper listings that might be in the center of a street and not close enough to a parcel to be reliable. So some very preliminary findings. For one thing, something we're able to do with this data that you can't with most available sources of rent information is to actually see a distribution of rents. So studios, 1-bedrooms, 2-bedroom listings. This is the asking rent on the x-axis here, and the number of listings on the y-axis, 3 bedrooms and 4 bedrooms. And with this level of information, we can start to ask more specific questions around affordability, for example. So this map shows 2-bedroom listings only by the price of the unit. The dark blue units are those that are at or below fair market rent for 2-bedroom units. I wanted to use that as one proxy for affordability. When I looked at units that met fair market rent for 0 to 4 bedrooms, only 7% of all the listings in Metro Boston are at or below fair market rent. And this is just zoomed in a little bit so you can see some more detail. And then another way to think about affordability is using the HUD income limits for low-income households. I looked at a household of 4 at each of the extremely low, very low, and low-income area median income thresholds, and found that less than 0.5% of extremely low 4-person households looking for a unit from 2 bedrooms or more would be able to find a unit that they could afford. Just less than 2% for very low income 4-person households, and just about 14% for low income households of 4. We can also look at this information over time. So the green dotted line shows the 0 through 4 bedroom fair market rent share. And even though it's a very low share of the total units, we can see that's actually been slightly increasing since Q4 of 2015. And similarly for the HUD data, or for the HUD limits, here's the 80% AMI. These are again 4-person households. There was a slight increase between 2015 and 2016, and really no change anywhere else since Q4 of 2015. So there are a few limitations that I want to make sure to be clear about, and just some work we hope to continue to do into the future. For one, we believe we also have some bias in our data sources. We know from research that others have done, and just from looking at our own listings, that we are likely underrepresenting units in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color. We have these geocoding constraints. We would love to be able to match every unit to a parcel, but we can't do that, especially with the Craigslist data. This is only 2 out of, we found 60 or more online rental listings platforms when we were doing our research. This is only 2 of them, so we might not be getting a totally complete picture. And then a challenge that's been a pretty big challenge for us is instability of PadMapper's API and Craigslist's data structure. So our scraper is very sensitive to changes in those data structures. So anytime they change them, it throws off our scraper, and then we have to go in and manually fix errors that we get on our code. So for that reason and some other reasons along the way, we have some gaps in our data collection, especially in early 2017, although for the last 6 months or more, it's been pretty stable. So we're continuing to report quarterly to our municipal partners. We are hoping to start to use the data more for our own work and to collaborate with other researchers. We are hoping to do some work to stabilize the digital infrastructure and improve some of our methods for cleaning and geocoding. We want to create a website so that we can actually display the information with some visualizations and make the data easily downloadable for our municipal partners. We would really love to publish the data publicly. At this point, it's not publicly available. We're a public agency, so it's really important for us to be transparent with our data, but we do have a number of remaining questions on this data, some of them that I mentioned in the limitations that we really want to get a handle on before we make it publicly available. We might try to add 1 or 2 more listings to get a more complete picture. And finally, all of this requires funding, so we're currently putting together a consortium to expand the municipal partners that we've worked with so far. Each municipal partner would pay a fee based on their population size, and then they would be able to not only get the data from us, but help inform and prioritize the work that we do over the coming year. So thank you. I'm really looking forward to Lauti's presentation.
Lauti, do you want to sit here? We can switch seats.
All right. Thank you, Ray, for the introduction. Thank you, Jessie. Thank you for coming here. It's much more people than I was expecting. My name is Lauti Cantar. I'm working with the American City Coalition. We're a not-profit working with housing mobility. And just building on what Jessie was telling, and building on what Dolores was presenting in the first session this morning, and Alex on the previous session in this room. And there was a question about how housing counselor. We came up with this tool that we call the housing mobility tool. So what have we built? Well, we built a tool to help voucher holders and housing counselors for low-income housing voucher holders to find houses in very high opportunity areas. How do we define a very high or moderate or high opportunity areas? Well, we use the data diversitydatakits.org data. They presented this morning. It's an amazing indicator. I recommend you guys to use it. We use it because it's a really comprehensive indicator about community level sources. We believe it's really useful. So what's our goal for building this? We want to improve the information and access to higher opportunity neighborhoods. We want to fill a gap there is in the market for voucher holders. So if any one of you is looking for an apartment, it's more likely going to go to Zillow.com or hire a realtor. If you have a voucher holder, you cannot do that because basically you have no money. So there is a gap, and we're trying to fulfill this. So we are working with 3 premises. One of them is that voucher holders do want to move to very high opportunity areas. Our second premise is that better information leads to better decisions. The third premise is that looking for an apartment is expensive in terms of money and time. So for each one of these premises, we came out with one answer for each one of them. So the first tool that we built for this platform, it's called the Housing Selector tool. Alex presented this morning a few findings about the survey that we conducted on 128 voucher holders across the Boston area. And when we asked them what are the housing search priorities, they told us they want to have community safety, school quality, and housing affordability. There is a myth that people doesn't want to move because they have their friends, family, place of worship. That didn't show up in our survey. So that's why we came up with this tool. We also asked them, what would be helpful for you in your next housing search? And they gave us unit listings in affordable places and maps. So since I'm feeling really courageous today, I'm going to do a live demo. So, Housing Selector tool. Can you see it right? It's in our webpage. You can go straight to there. So here we built something that is going to do a live query in Craigslist.com looking for housings depending on your search criteria. So you can select the price range. You can select the number of bedrooms that you're looking for or that your voucher holder it's for you. You can look the priorities, COI, safety, school quality, transportation cost, and you can zoom in on the area. So let's say we want to look at Newton, just because. So we hit search. It's going to take a few seconds, but hey, wow, we have listings. We can download that. It's a table here that you can download in an Excel file, PDF, or you can even actually click on that place and get the full information in Craigslist.com. You can look at the pictures. You can check the listing information. So remember, our second premise is that better information leads to better decision. In the survey that we conducted, we asked them what kind of information you would like to have. And they told us safety, school quality. So we came out with this second tool that we call the Address Locator tool. So let's say you find a unit, not using our tool, don't do it, but you find a unit and you want to check out what are the social economic indicators of that area. So you come here, type it. I'm going to type our address in Roxbury. You click search, and you get few indicators. So what's the COI index? What's the median household income? Poverty rate, unemployment, work score. This is doing a live API request. And if you want to check out the schools, you can have it, and it's going to go straight to greatschools.org information. And down here, you have all the how to interpret all these indicators. So our third premise is that looking for a house, it's expensive. So if any one of you look for a house, you know how much time it takes and how much money you have to spend going to visit those places. Put in that equation that you have a voucher holders and you have a 3 months time frame since the day you get a voucher to the day that expire. Between those 3 months, you have to look for an apartment, you have to sign the lease, and you have to move. If you want to make it harder, put that you're poor, right? If you want to even make it harder, maybe you're a single mother. So how can we, using digital tools, help you make that process smoother and quicker? So we came out with this third tool called the mailing tool. So here, you sign up for, in a Google Sheets form, you give us your name, your address, your phone number, the number of bedrooms of apartment you're looking for, if you need a wheelchair, if you need a pet-friendly apartment, and you give us the top 5 locations that you're looking for in Massachusetts. We get this information every time that we run the scraper. We are going to send you an email to your email account with all the tailored listings that we curated for you. We believe this is really cool because many people doesn't have a computer. So if you have the Microsoft Excel app in your phone, you can even open that CVS file and go straight to that link from your phone. So coming back to the presentation, we saw that. That was a backup, just in case. So here is where you can find the tool. It's hosted in our web page, but you can host it in your web page. It has been developed with open software. It's basically R and Shiny apps and a few APIs. You can customize it for your own needs. So let's say you're coming here from Worcester and you want to do it for Worcester and you don't want to use ours. You can do it. The code is shared at our GitHub page under an MIT license, which means that you can copy, change it, recreate it, anything as far as you mention us. So if you have any questions or comments, just please reach out to us. We're more than happy to answer your questions or talk or have coffee to see how can we improve and help people to move on this letter. Thank you very much.
I've never seen a web demo go that smoothly. I have to be honest, ever.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Kazakoff. I'm standing in front of the projector. I'm an analytics project manager at the City of Boston, and with me today is also Amelia, who's an analyst with the Department of Neighborhood Development. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work we've done to better understand the landscape of Airbnb in the City of Boston. And we're picking on Airbnb a little bit because they are the biggest player in the short-term rental field, but we do know that there's a lot more, dozens of short-term rental platforms out there as well. But Airbnb is kind of the largest proxy we can use to understand what's happening. And there are many people at the city as well who are working on different aspects of short-term rental policy. We're just going to talk about some of the data that we've been exploring. So why are we looking at short-term rentals in the city? We've seen a bunch of headlines similar to these, and we've heard similar complaints from our residents that the short-term rental market is not what it was originally intended, or may not be originally what it intended, where you can rent out your apartment while you're out of town, or you can share a spare bedroom to make ends meet between roommates. Instead, we're seeing this proliferation of hosts that are more commercial entities and quasi-hotel agencies rather than individuals renting out their homes. And we're not the only ones. There have been many others across the US and globally who have dug into some of the available Airbnb data to get a better sense of what was going on in their cities. So we know nationally that a 10% increase in Airbnb 10% increase in Airbnb listings leads to in a 0.42% increase in rent and an increase in home prices as well. New York City has done some more interesting digging into the data and show that a small percentage of hosts actually host a large percent of the units. They also have a proliferation of ghost hotels in New York City, kind of based off of what they've done to start to regulate the industry. And these ghost hotels are individual bedrooms that are being rented out as bedrooms, but they're all in the same unit. So effectively, these individual room rentals are still taking whole units off of the rental market. And there's a concern about rapid gentrification of neighborhoods, and New York City is seeing this, where in 72 predominantly black neighborhoods, the host population is significantly more white than the resident population. Specifically in Boston, a study that was done at UMass Boston showed that a one standard deviation increase in Airbnb listings, mean Airbnb listings, led to a 0.4% increase in rents, but that's a 3.1% increase in rents when you look at higher density of Airbnb. So the more Airbnbs in a neighborhood by density, the higher your rent increase is going to be. And using this data, they decided to project out to January 2019 what that would be in dollar amounts. And they used a 24% growth rate, holding everything else equal, and thought that that would translate into a $178 a month rent increase. And what we'll see is that 24% was very conservative of an estimate. So for our work to try to better understand what was going on in the city of Boston, we took an existing data set from Inside Airbnb. So Inside Airbnb grabs a snapshot of multiple cities once a year. So our data is from October 2017. They also make a dashboard, so anyone who's not super analytically savvy can go and ask some research questions of the data on this dashboard without having to download the data set and explore it themselves. For our purposes, we wanted to manipulate the data a bit differently, so we took the same back-end data and created our own dashboard. And this is a terrible data visualization, but it points to the caveats in the data. So for us to look at Boston's data, I needed to put in multiple disclaimers for all of the data that we show. And that's because we didn't really want anyone looking at this data and making the wrong conclusions from it. So because this is all scraped data, and it's scraped from Airbnb, and we don't have very specific address data, everything's a little bit fuzzy. So our latitudes and longitudes are off by plus or minus 500 square feet. The occupancy rate is a calculation based on reviews and the frequency of reviews. So that's not totally accurate, but we could use this to get a sense of what was going on in the city and if people's concerns matched what we were seeing in the data. And we are seeing that there are currently over 4,000, almost 5,000 active listings in the Boston area, in Boston, not Boston, in Boston on Airbnb. That was of October 2017. What we know is that that number is probably much higher because the number of entire homes listed on Airbnb actually doubled between 2015 and 2016. So that estimate earlier about a 24% increase year over year was a very low estimate. So we know that they're rapidly growing. Of these listings, nearly 2/3 are entire homes or apartments. And of those entire homes or apartments, over 2/3 of those are available for more than 60 days out of the year. So that could be someone who is constantly listing their property and leaving when someone rents it, but maybe more likely that it's a completely open unit. And we dug a little further and looked at units that were available 90 days or more, and the number is still high. It's still pretty close to 60%. So we calculated a vacancy rate increase. So if we put these units back on the market, what would that mean for our vacancy rate? Our current vacancy rate is 3.1%, and we think it could jump to 3.8, possibly as high as 4.25. And then we say that's a conservative estimate because this doesn't include data from any of the other sites. It doesn't have data from VRBO or HomeAway or anything. This is just based on our Airbnb data. And so we wanted to dig into who was renting out these units. For the units that are listed for rent and actually were rented, so they had at least one review, 5% of hosts in the city controlled 38% of the properties. And when we looked at just units that were listed, not necessarily rented, it's 1% of hosts that operate over 1/3 of the properties in the city. So we have the same concentration that we were seeing in New York City. So I wanted to give a little snapshot of who some of these hosts are. As you can see from their own bios, they are commercial entities. They are not your neighbor renting out their home while they're on vacation. And because of some of the work that was done in New Orleans, we were able to actually get a more recent count of Kara and Sonder. So we know that between October and March, that Kara had added about 60 or so more units, and Sonder's inventory doubled in the past 6 months in the city of Boston. So that was quite shocking when we saw that. And I'll just pick on Sonder a little bit more. This is actually in their marketing materials for their financing. So they quadrupled their inventory in 2016, welcomed 5,000 new guests every month, and that's just in 10 cities. Boston's one of their 10 cities. And before I finish, I wanted to dig a little bit into Chinatown since they were in those headlines I showed at the beginning. We've heard lots of concerns about Chinatown specifically in terms of whole buildings being bought up and flipped into Airbnbs. And what we see our friends, Kara and Sonder and Mike from the slide before, that they have a large presence in Chinatown. But what we also saw in Chinatown that was particularly striking is that 80% of the units are hosted by someone who hosts more than one unit. So only 20% of the units in Chinatown are one person renting out their home. The rest of the units are by someone that may have a spare room, but more likely are commercial hosts. So that's 80% of the units. So the concerns in Chinatown may be very real. So digging through all of this data, we have come up with many, many questions that we find interesting, and we're really hoping to get more detailed data in order to answer these questions more intelligently. But things like, do different hosts host the same unit? So if we take a high-rise in Fenway, for example, we can see through the listings that it looks like a similar listing in the same building, but is Kara listing unit 1 and Mike is listing unit 2, or are Kara and Mike listing the same unit? That makes a huge difference at scale as to how many units are being taken off the market. We also know some neighborhoods are disproportionately impacted, like Chinatown, but the data is not granular enough for us to look at neighborhoods like the Seaport. We can't look by zip code yet and see what's happening with those luxury high-rises in the Seaport. I know that there's ghost hotels in Boston. I can see them because some people are not good at differentiating their listings. I predict there's at least 100, but there's probably many more than that. So we know that those ghost hotels are going to be whole units taking whole apartments off the market. We don't know what those are without addresses. And then to end on a positive note, what are the positive economic and social impacts of having Airbnbs in neighborhoods that are not on the typical Boston tourist track? So I'd really like to know more about that as well. And thank you. Let's get past that slide.
I haven't been pausing for questions because all of our speakers had used their full time, but we'll get to questions in a minute. Good.
I'd like to thank the BARI organizers for the opportunity to present our data today. My name is Amar Mehta. Oh, sorry, not used to using a microphone. My name is Amar Mehta. I'm from the Research and Evaluation Office of the Boston Public Health Commission, and I'm going to summarize this analysis on subsidized housing and adult food insecurity using data from our Boston Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, which I'll refer to as the Boston BRIFIS in short. But first I want to just dive into before I dive in, I want to touch on food insecurity in general. And there are various definitions of food insecurity, but the Health Commission defines it conceptually as the state of being without reliable access to sufficient quantity of affordable, nutritious, and culturally appropriate food. It is estimated that 13% of adults in the Boston metropolitan area are food insecure, and it's a growing public health concern with consequences resulting in a wide range of health outcomes and frequent healthcare utilization. And the recent Cost of Hunger report indicates that in Massachusetts in 2016, that $2.4 billion in healthcare costs are attributable to food insecurity. Population studies indicate that food insecurity is strongly linked with housing insecurity and with other demographic factors. But the impact of subsidized housing programs on food insecurity is not known. And we're interested in this question because housing assistance programs provide affordable housing to low-income people, as well as free up financial resources for food and material access. So, to examine this question, we leveraged data from the Boston BRIFIS, and so this is a survey that the Health Commission conducts every 2 years, and the survey methodology and design, this is modeled after the BRIFIS that's conducted by the CDC in collaboration with the state health departments. For this analysis, I'd just like to say it's one of our primary surveillance systems where we can understand health inequities and the social determinants, and it also contributes greatly to our Health of Boston report. And so for this analysis, it includes an unweighted sample of nearly 10,000 adult respondents pulled from the 2010, 13, and 2015 surveys. But then we weight that data so that it can reflect the Boston adult population. The Boston BRIFIS is unique in that we have this single item question on public housing status where we ask, are you a public housing resident living in a building owned by the BHA, part of a household that receives rental assistance such as Section 8 or any other rental assistance program, or neither of the above? So with this question, we are able to distinguish between BHA residents and renters receiving assistance. We also ask a question on housing tenure, whether respondents own, rent their home, or have some other arrangement. And then we've leveraged the responses from these two questions to create a housing status variable with the categories of BHA resident, rental assistance renter, homeowner, non-renter, non-owner, and unassisted renter, which is the reference. And for this analysis, we are more interested in making comparisons between the BHA residents and the rental assistance renters with unassisted renters, who are probably who are more demographically similar to the BHA residents and rental assistance renters, unlike homeowners, which are healthier and more food secure than those two groups. Our food insecurity measures come from two questions adapted from the Food Security Supplement of the Current Population Survey, which were the food that we bought just didn't last and we didn't have money to get more. And we were hungry but didn't eat because we couldn't afford enough food. And those questions, well, items were followed up with the question, was that often, sometimes, or never true for you in the last 12 months? And for this analysis, we collapsed the responses of often or sometimes true, and being in that category was classified as being food insecure. So then we modeled each food insecurity measure as a function of housing status, where we adjusted for survey year, age, sex, race, ethnicity, education, and household income. Our statistical procedures accounted for complex survey design, and we obtained odds ratios as measures of association. And moving on to the results, these percentages are unadjusted and weighted. But what we found was that of all adult residents, 24% reported that the food that we bought just didn't last and we didn't have money to get more, at least sometimes true over the previous 12 months. A corresponding 11% reported we were hungry but didn't eat because we couldn't afford enough food. But the percentages vary by housing status considerably. So for example, 46% and 55% of BHA residents and RA renters respectively reported the food that we bought just didn't last, in comparison with 24% of unassisted renters and only 10% of homeowners. And we observed a similar pattern for the other food insecurity measure. In our adjusted models, we found that the food insecurity measures were strongly associated with rental assistance renters in comparison with unassisted renters. So, for example, this odds ratio of 1.74 would indicate that there was a 74% higher odds or probability, if you will, of reporting the food that we bought just didn't last among rental assistance renters in comparison with unassisted renters. Similarly, we observed an 81% higher odds of we were hungry but didn't eat among the rental assistance renters in comparison with the unassisted rental assistance renters in comparison with the unassisted renters. In contrast, we observed no significant associations for BHA residents, and as expected, homeowners experienced significantly lower odds of these food insecurity measures in comparison with unassisted renters. Now, keep in mind that the reference is the unassisted renters. If we switch the comparison group to homeowners, then yes, the BHA residents did experience higher odds of reporting food insecurity in comparison with homeowners. And the same could be said for the unassisted renters as well. Now, we also restricted our analysis to adults who reported household income of less than $20,000. And the reason why we did this was because we wanted the comparison group of unassisted renters to be income eligible for housing assistance programs that are offered by the BHA. And even in this restricted analysis, we've observed similar results, that food insecurity, according to these measures, were strongly associated with rental assistance renter in comparison with unassisted renter. So in summary, we observed that rental assistance renters, but not BHA residents, were more likely to report food insecurity in comparison with unassisted renters. Now, just like to mention again that if the comparison group were homeowners, then all three groups would have experienced significantly higher odds of food insecurity. But why do we see associations for food insecurity for rental assistance renters but not BHA residents in comparison with the other renters? And we can speculate, but it could be related to the economic burdens that the rental assistant recipients are facing. So we do know that there are income eligibility differences between BHA public housing and rental assistant applicants. So rental assistant applicants must earn less than 50% of the area median income versus less than 80% for the BHA residents. There are also additional housing-related costs for rental assistance recipients. So utility costs may not be covered. And the payment standards have not kept up with rent inflation in the Boston rental market. But I think there's more investigation is warranted in this rental assistance renter population, specifically with respect to the economic challenges that they face and how they affect food insecurity. I'd just like to point out some inherent limitations. This was a cross-sectional analysis, so whether housing status precedes food insecurity is not known. And while the two questions that we use for food insecurity are validated, severity of food insecurity is limited in scope with just these two questions in comparison to the 18-item USDA scale. Before we could discuss what we could do to improve food security among all Boston adults or the population as a whole, I'd just like to discuss briefly about the programmatic activities that the Health Commission is involved with in collaboration with the BHA and other partners. The Boston REACH project aims to increase affordable healthy foods for BHA residents and promote awareness. The Farm Fresh Boston campaign highlights Massachusetts Healthy Incentives Program to help SNAP participants purchase locally grown produce. And in collaboration with DO-IT and the Mayor's Office on Food Access, the Community Foods Resources List and Maps displays the city's free, low-cost emergency food outlets. And this was a collaborative project between colleagues from the Boston Public Health Commission and the Boston Housing Authority. And some of us are here in the room, and we're happy to answer questions. So thanks.
Thank you for that. I think we'll need the microphones on at the table after this as we move into Q&A. So moderator's prerogative. Jessie and Elizabeth, I wonder, while you all are preparing your questions, I just wanted to ask a quick question. There does seem to be this tension between the Airbnb listings and the sort of opportunity of a new technology, new methodology for finding places to stay and live, versus what you're pointing out, which is there is sort of a shortage, and now we have better ways to understand what that means and how that's shaping up. Are there ways in which we can start to, through regulatory processes or collaborative engagements with policymakers, to start to put good policies around how to regulate both how the Airbnb platform experience and users and renters or listers could potentially engage in more of a temporary stay options for people looking for units in the city, or is that not? Are there no policy recommendations to be made between these two conversations?
Have you been reading the Globe lately? So the city is working on an ordinance to regulate short-term rentals back to their original intention.
Okay. That was pretty good.
That's all I'm going to say about it.
I haven't been reading the Globe lately, but that's good.
Read the Globe, it's fascinating.
I'm looking to buy a subscription. So what questions do we have from the audience? I'll walk around and with the microphone. David.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around that last finding because it seems totally counterintuitive, right? That people who are poor, did you have a sense of in general, we would think people who are poor who aren't getting rental assistance are paying more of their income in rent and would have less money for food. But your finding seems to be quite striking in the opposite direction. And I'm just still trying to understand. Did you have a sense as to how much rent those comparison low-income unassisted renters are actually paying?
No, I don't believe we have that information that's collected in the Griffiths. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, we don't have information on the rent that the renters are paying. in the BRIFIS, but your observation is, I'm sorry, what did you find that was reversed?
In general, when we worry about housing affordability,
Right.
intuitively we say people who are spending more than 50% of their income in rent
Right.
have got less money to spend on other stuff, and other survey data suggests that they cut back on is food.
Right.
And you're finding exactly the opposite, which I'm just trying to wrap my head around. I'm saying, I'm not questioning your data, I'm just
Oh, no.
understand the finding.
Okay. Okay, because the way I interpret the findings are that, clicker? Yeah, me. Go with that. Perhaps some of my colleagues in the room could expand on my answer or clarify.
To the one, yeah, that's right. With
Right.
incomes less than 20,000.
Right. So everyone in all of the participants included in this analysis have an income of below 20,000. Right. So, right. Why? I see. So, why would rental assistance renters?
Why would rental assistance renters be more likely to report that they didn't have enough food?
Yeah, it is puzzling. I mean, because we are controlling for other demographic factors, and but I think it's understudied. I mean, we need to know more about the economic barriers that they face, and how that could relate to food insecurity.
I mean, the speculation is that they have less supports all around, uncompared, on a relative basis. So, so it's not just income, right? That you'd want to know about, and part of it is understanding that income as a percentage of your rent, et cetera, in that relationship. There's probably differences in those groups still that we need to tease out. What this study has done for us is to really highlight that first is the experience, at least with respect to food insecurity, is different across these three groups. And then we traditionally been in the practice of kind of lumping any kind of assistance together with the VHA with the RA renters. And this is showing us that at least around this measure, there's something else going on. And so really it's kind of, we're scratching the surface here on the need to do, much deeper dive into the experiences and what resources they have available.
I think I have a clarification before I come to you, Tim.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are two questions. Who are the renters? What's the population of the renters? Who are your renters? Are those the voucher holders?
Oh,
Who are your renters?
they could be in they could be in Section 8 or in another rental assistance program.
What's the data source for the rental assistance?
So this is a self-reported, this is all based off of self-report for the Boston Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System. So it's
Anyone who says they get rentals.
right.
Right.
It's just. Yeah, the initial question is, are you a public housing resident living in a building owned by the Boston Housing Authority or part of a household that receives rental assistance such as Section 8 or any other rental assistance program?
Okay. Tim?
Tim Davis, Boston Planning and Development. Leave it on this slide, actually. A couple of things here I'm seeing. One is that the unassisted renters is not necessarily accurate. I think there's a lot of people who would answer this question incorrectly if they're living in an income-restricted unit that's not BHA and they don't have a voucher. So you haven't necessarily pulled out those people separately to look at them, which is about 8% of the city's units. So that's something to think about. But also, There's the possibility that some of these unassisted renters, a large proportion of them are students who are not necessarily going hungry at night. You know, they may be making less than 20. So I think that's a big part in Boston we always deal with. And I think you are right when you talk about the difference between the BHA and the RA residents, because someone with a voucher can spend up to 40% of their income towards rent and still use their voucher. Whereas in BHA, they're going to be spending 30%. So I think that is a very big difference there between the two populations. So I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing that.
Yeah, we're always interested in possibilities of revising this question, so, you know, maybe we can talk after.
A question in the back.
Hello, I wanted to ask Lauti about the mass housing tool. So is that live and ready to go? And if yes, how are you promoting it to voucher holders so that they will utilize this, what looks like to be a really great tool?
First question, yes, it's live. Just log into it. I took a big risk for doing that. And then this is something that we are just releasing. We got together all the pieces working this week, and this is version 1. So we're looking forward to start promoting it and getting inputs from community, housing counselors, voucher holders, users, anything that can lead to make this better and stronger.
With the mass housing tool, I think it's great. It's a really great resource. I think a lot of voucher issuing agencies can use. Have you thought about adding a data layer, whether or not the apartment meets fair market rent, which in Boston and Cambridge likely to be no, but it might be helpful to voucher holders to know how much more than 30% of their income they would have to pay to rent that unit?
Yes, one of the functionalities on the first piece, you can even look either look for price and number of bedrooms, or you can select what's your voucher your voucher size, and based on that, it's applying a filter directly to BHA payment standards. And the email piece, it's only showing only affordable housing listings.
Further questions? Really? Nobody? Yeah.
Is the city of Boston considering any sort of like, could they do an inclusionary zoning? You know, could you actually meld kind of Airbnb, the chronic, the small group of commercial Airbnb owners? Could you apply some sort of affordable housing direct connection mandate to that group?
Just going to repeat the question because we didn't have a microphone. The question is there a way to do an inclusionary zoning type situation with the Airbnb listing and sort of linking that data as a policy?
I'm going to punt that over to our BPDA and D&D folks.
I oversee the inclusionary development policy for the city. Because we want these buildings to be regular residential buildings, we have inclusionary development policies for regular residential buildings. The question that I'm beginning to see is that I've had a couple of small developers who are developing buildings that I know that they're in the short-term rental business. And I have been very steadfast in saying, you're not letting your units off-site. I want those units in that building to help kind of discourage, you know, them to use the whole building as an Airbnb building. And hopefully, when we do get something passed, it'll help to relieve that situation as well. But we've also had a couple of buildings that we have inclusionary development units in that are fairly sizable buildings where we're getting complaints from tenants because it's beginning to happen around them. So it is of concern for us, just as it is for the mayor's office, and how to handle that. But in terms of, we don't necessarily want any buildings to be these full-time commercial, you know, we'd rather someone build a hotel. So, so in that respect, we're not looking at a kind of inclusionary zoning effort for short-term rentals, no.
Are there any other kind of any other considerations about a direct relationship between
I think that's a question for more of the mayor's office, if there's any kind of income that we get, and the state's doing some rulemaking around probably taxes, whether some of those taxes or other income might be redirected to housing. That's, I think, more for the mayor's office and for the state level.
Thank you. I have one question here.
Hi, along those same lines, I'm curious if you guys have any idea, should Boston pass something in terms of Airbnb and short-term rentals, but let's say the rest of the surrounding area does not, would that actually allow for a significant impact if Quincy, Revere, Chelsea, et cetera, is still a really great hotspot for short-term rentals?
I think some of that falls under the state, as we just mentioned, that the state is also trying to pass their own bill that's more for taxation purposes, but I can't really say what the other surrounding cities will do if and when we pass an ordinance. Yeah, I can't speak to them. Maybe do you know from where at my PC work?
Well, not directly to that question, but just going back to the connection between the rental listings and the Airbnb and policy, I think as researchers, we're always looking for more data to actually study these issues more deeply so that we can recommend informed policy. So I know part of the state legislation is to get more direct data from Airbnb, and so once we have that, maybe we can look at that with our rental listings data and try to understand kind of how the two interact and what can be done to kind of ease the situation.
Just from a policy perspective, I'm on the BPDA, former BRA board, and we've ended up approving some of the new construction that ended up being short-term rentals, but we didn't, at least at the beginning, we didn't always know that's what the developer's intent was. It wasn't always clear. I mean, the developer doesn't come in saying, I'm going to develop these apartment units to actually lease them out as Airbnb units. And so we relied upon staff to sort of do some sorting, but it's not always easy to tell in advance whether it's going to be a legitimate apartment building or an Airbnb building. After a point in time, to get to the second question around, regional impact, after a certain amount of time, you start to smell smoke around certain kinds of things. So for example, that you're more likely to get those kinds of units, let's say, in the area of the hospitals or in the Fenway, because there's a demand for those kinds of short-term rentals that's greater in some areas than others. And then you look at some of the design components, and you see that there's a cutout in front of the building for vehicles to be able to pull up and unload, or you see that it has an inordinately large lobby area. And then you start to say to yourself, this doesn't look entirely right. And I think the staff have been really good as the magnitude of the problem has become more apparent. And as you get people who live in the neighborhood seeing their buildings being converted around them, and I would have to say from the board perspective, although I can't speak for the entire board, that if there were some inclusionary policies that were put before us, we'd approve them. Because our goal is not to be building hotels if the owners are not coming in saying that they're in fact building hotels. But this is one of those areas, and there are several, where the marketplace runs ahead of what public policy can do. And developers are very smart people, and they have figured out, without zoning changes and the like, how to use the market to get what they want, even though it's not always in the best interest of the city.
That's a tremendous insights there to time. So I think it's really interesting the way data is playing against sort of how the policy and regulatory changes are happening. Before we go, I'd like to thank our panel today, and I'd like to invite you all to join me in thanking them. Really tremendous amount of knowledge and insights and research that you're all doing, so thank you for sharing it with us today. I'd also like to thank you. I'm new to this data world, but one thing that I loved in all of your presentations is how you all thanked and noted the people that you're collaborating with, and it's something that I will be taking back to my sort of design affordable housing world. I think it's just a really great thing. So thanks. Next session starts in 15 minutes. Thanks.
Are you guys great?